ecological restoration and cultural revitalization go hand in hand with bringing bison back to our tribal lands. Wildlife management, though, is a lot less about managing wildlife than it is about managing people.
Hello and welcome again to NRCC's 2021 virtual Jackson Hole Wildlife Symposium. We continue our keynote conversations with some of the top leaders in human and wildlife coexistence across the greater Yellowstone ecosystem. Today, I'm very happy to welcome Jason Valdez. Jason is the Tribal Buffalo Program Manager at the National Wildlife Federation and a member of the Eastern Shoshone Tribe from the Wind River Reservation. Jason has worked in wildlife management for over 20 years, and for many of those has worked to restore bison to the Wind River Reservation. Jason seeks to connect the cultural and ecological significance of buffalo and is currently developing a curriculum around environmental science and indigenous biodiversity practices. Jason has a master's degree in land resources and environmental science from Montana State University and is currently an adjunct instructor at Central Wyoming College. So welcome to Jason, and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you very much, Ben. I appreciate the opportunity to visit with you today about my work and about buffalo and tribes, specifically the Eastern Shoshone. Thank you.
What are some of the main human-wildlife challenges that you focus on, and then how has your background prepared you for the work you do?
Well, I think a lot about the history of Shoshone people and other tribes, in that for millennia we survived and thrived on the wildlife economy. The health of our communities was based in the biodiversity of the plants and animals, and that paradigm of sustainability was undermined with westward expansion and colonization. And so today we're almost in a paradigm shift of going to recognize some of those morals and values that our grandmas and grandpas had about our relationship with plants and animals. And, you know, with colonization, we've separated ourselves from the natural world. Not only our people, but everyone has a disconnect from the natural world. I think a lot of my work is a paradigm shift in helping people understand and value indigenous knowledge systems and how that can play a key role in how we manage what we call resources. We refer to as relatives. And so that relationality, the relationship that we have with the four-leggeds, the ones that fly, the ones that swim, the ones that crawl, that is a paradigm that we need to re-emphasize and reconnect. And so my dad is a retired biologist. He worked for many years as a federal employee, but also as a tribal member, and was implementing traditional ecological knowledge before it was a term. And that, growing up with some of his work and seeing, the reintroduction of pronghorn antelope, the reintroduction of bighorn sheep, and the sustainable management of our native fish species, recognizing the value of water, not only for agriculture, but for many, many other uses, really gave me a foundation, I think, and that's helped me carry forward in what I'm trying to do with bison or buffalo restoration of tribal lands. And it really is about reconnecting with that philosophy, that understanding. And so I think that having a biologist father really sent me on a trajectory to do this type of work.
When did you first start thinking about reintroduction of bison? When did that first start to happen for you?
Oh, well, I was a young kid, again, witnessing the reintroduction of pronghorn and bighorn sheep to the reservation, and spent a lot of time with my dad in the backcountry in our wilderness area on horseback. We used to talk about, why isn't there buffalo anymore? Why isn't there, what happened? And it was kind of a conversation we always just kind of had, and didn't really take it much further than a conversation. But then in '97, I had a chance to go to Africa, East Africa, with my dad, and we witnessed the wildebeest migration in the Serengeti and the Masai Mara. And that was pretty incredible. We drove for over 100 miles and on dirt roads, and as far as you could see in every direction was wildebeest and about 30 other species. That was pretty incredible, but that's less than 5% of what the bison was here, less than 200 years ago. So when I returned home, I had a newfound appreciation, not only for where I'm from, but who I am. And so it kind of became a passion to, think about what I could do. So I knew I needed to have a science degree, and decided that that's what I was going to focus on, and went to Montana State University, several schools before that. But at MSU, I focused entirely on tribal bison restoration throughout my undergrad and grad programs. And that's sent me on this trajectory of bison restoration and working to bring that animal back to my own home community.
I'm sort of interested in hearing you talk about how you just laid out the sort of story of bison in North America, contains the history of the erasure of indigenous peoples and cultures throughout the interior plains. I guess, the restoration of bison is both symbolic and a physical renewal of these lands and the peoples who lived long before the U.S. state was here. So could you speak about the history of bison and people, both in the past and in the present too, and how that history is intimately tied?
The Shoshone people have been here thousands of years. We speak the Uto-Aztecan dialect, which comes from the South Aztec. Many other Shoshonian-speaking peoples, like the Comanche, the Paiute, the Ute, the Goshute, all part of this large linguistic group. So we've been here for a very, very long time. Just in my backyard, just the archaeological evidence says 13,000 years. We believe, even longer than that. So when Lewis and Clark arrived in 1804, they witnessed the 30 to 60 million bison. And Sacagawea was from my community here, although she was abducted as a child from likely the Crow and traded to the Mandan or Hidatsa up in North Dakota, where she met Lewis and Clark. Well, they witnessed the biodiversity that was here. With westward expansion, negotiations were made, treaties were signed. And in 1863, the Shoshone Reservation was 44 million acres. Of course, this was before the states, but would have been half of Wyoming, northern Colorado, northern Utah, and eastern Idaho, and much of what is now Yellowstone. Only 5 years later, in 1868, our reservation was reduced by roughly 42 million acres. This was because of the California Gold Rush, the Oregon Trail, Mormon, Santa Fe trails. It all converged through our Shoshone territory in the Red Desert. And so when our reservation was reduced, well, so did our lifestyle. And reservations were created as places where we would be able to maintain our language, culture, practices, ceremonies, hunting, fishing. That's what reservations were created for. The federal government failed that responsibility to ensure that would be available for us. And with reduction in land base, then came the General Allotment Act, which either forced us to become farmers and ranchers, or our lands were taken away. Then the federal government, took our kids away in the boarding school era, where our languages were lost. Then they outlawed our ceremonies and our ceremonial spirituality, custom ways of life. So the whole foundation of our people was essentially systematically removed. While this contemporarily has created a lot of challenges, we our languages are nearly gone. That language contains a worldview of how you see the world, how you understand relationships with plants and animals. Without that worldview, we are in dire straits. So, cultural revitalization is what's possible now in this era that we're in of federal Indian law and policy of self determination. We now have the ability to work to revitalize our language. We can buy back our land, even though it was removed from us, in examples of land repatriation. We can decolonize our land use to reprioritize habitat or ecological integrity as opposed to agriculture or livestock grazing. We can emphasize the ecological importance of a river, um, staying in the river instead of being diverted 100% for agriculture. We can change the way we use and relate with the land in a way that's uh, in recognition of those morals and values of our ancestors. Buffalo restoration falls right into line with what's been missing from our people, and that is a foundation. We, the Shoshone people, called ourselves the Buffalo Eaters. We distinguished our bands by the foods that we ate. So we had the sheep eaters, the salmon eaters over the mountain. We were the buffalo eaters, but the buffalo has been gone from our diet from 130 years. We had to rely on the federal government to give us rations in order to even survive. So as we were starving and dying of disease, federal government was systematically taking land away from us and promoting agriculture. Well, today the majority of our population is under the age of 30. And so if we want to create leadership, if we want to exercise sovereignty and self-determination into the future, and be strong as Shoshone people or Arapaho people or Crow or Lakota, well, we have to have leaders that are knowledgeable in that history, but also knowledgeable in our history of self-determination and sovereignty and the roles of our treaties. Buffalo is a foundation for bringing back some of that foundational understanding and learning. It's not only cultural revitalization, but bringing back a keystone species is ecological restoration. We don't know what the sagebrush steppes and high desert elevation ecosystems or even some of the grassland ecosystems look like because we haven't been able to see the keystone species make effective ecological change with their systematic destruction. So we have to relearn what it means for buffalo as wildlife, not livestock. What buffalo in their ecological role on the landscape can do to increase biodiversity of insects, of birds, mammals. Salmon would be synonymous to the salmon people as buffalo is to the buffalo people. And
Mm,
so if you look in the Northwest, if you've ever heard of Billy Frank Jr.,
yeah.
fought for years for indigenous rights to be able to fish, and successfully won with the Bolt decision. Federal
Mm,
government has to uphold its trust responsibility to those indigenous people who have that access to that salmon. So
mm,
the buffalo is similar, but there is no federal legislation currently that upholds that treaty responsibility, that trust responsibility of maintaining a buffalo population for
mm,
our buffalo people.
mm,
And that's why the Indian Buffalo Management Act that we're heavily advocating for today would help to establish that monetary obligation to the buffalo tribes that is and should be upheld by that treaty. The IBMA we feel is going to have more strength with Deb Haaland, as Secretary of Interior, was introduced by Don Young. And what it does is utilize language in the Bolt decision to allocate funding to the Intertribal Buffalo Council, federally recognized tribes that are working to restore buffalo, that there be funding allocated for that. And that would significantly increase the capability of not only individual tribes, but the Intertribal Buffalo Council, which is a sovereign entity, a membership of 74 tribes, to ensure that we have the adequate funding to get buffalo restored to tribal communities. And that has a spectrum of goals. Some tribes don't have a very large land base, but that doesn't diminish the importance of that buffalo to their people or community or youth. Some tribes have a large land base, but have difficult political processes to get through to manage buffalo on a large landscape. So ITBC is a very important entity in ensuring that that buffalo are restored. And in terms of bison, it's very important that we consider not only the genetics but their treatment. 90% of the bison in the United States today are managed for commercial meat production. A large percentage of those animals also have cattle gene integration. And because they're managed for commercial meat production, they're essentially ranched animals. There's less than 25,000 conservation buffalo, 12 herds managed by the Department of Interior, a couple public herds in Utah, and several scattered tribal populations. But very few of these populations are managed as wildlife, managed on the landscape where they're under predation or under natural regulating factors like climate and access to forage, like other wildlife. And so we've got to create more of these types of opportunities in places where it's possible. And if you put the animals back in their habitat, they're going to do just fine. It's the people that we have to control. And that's part of that paradigm shift. This movement or momentum of bison restoration is only growing.
Thinking about the GYE, I'm just curious how you think we can sort of, as citizens, people that live here, can expand our sort of recognition and empathy towards wildlife and grow that amongst the entire population of people that live in this region, especially as it's growing in its numbers.
Federal lands have been misused. Had those lands been tribal control or still part of reservations, we wouldn't have things like wildland urban interface, predator deprivation, the wilderness concept of leave no trace, or the untrammeled by man. You wouldn't have the issues with fire, because fire would have been utilized. So we've got to kind of backtrack a little bit on what's been done in terms of progress, because we still are building roads. We're still putting in infrastructure. We're still allowing access and giving people free run of the land based on their recreational activities that they enjoy. With indigenous people, these places, you can't put a value on them. There is no money value. Land is, you look at the Lakota and the Black Hills, which was illegally stolen, admittedly so by the United States government, but they want to pay billions of dollars to the Lakota, and they still refuse it because they say you can't sell the land. That type of philosophy still exists in our tribal communities, and that's a hard concept to help other people understand who believe this land is your land is a legitimate song, because it's not.
So here, sort of in the region we're living in, there was the ecosystem concept was given or created to sort of think about this whole region as one big region, the greater Yellowstone ecosystem. And I think in one ways that's an attempt to try to create a little bit more relationality, or at least think about ecological connection as something that all species and landscapes are intertwined. What are we moving the dial to a better future? And in what ways are we falling short?
We're falling very short. If we look at the loss of biodiversity, the loss of birds, the loss of amphibians and fish species and mollusks and snails, you know, indigenous people are only 5% of the world's population, but on our lands exists 80% of the world's biodiversity. We prioritize oil and gas extraction and agriculture and grazing at the expense of wildlife and habitat. Uh, our places have been plowed up, paved over, and fenced in. That prevents migration of ungulates. We decided to feed ungulates as a way to make more money. Uh, I had the chance to go to the Altai in Russia, and I have colleagues in Mongolia, where they're about 100 years behind in terms of progress. What we're encouraging those indigenous people to do is fight against that colonial paradigm that is imposing land use changes that are more reminiscent of the colonial process that was undertook here. We're not making progress. We're destroying ourselves from the ground up, polluting waters, polluting air. Until we can make some drastic changes as human beings, which human beings have lost our role as stewards of this Mother Earth. Until that can change, we aren't going anywhere. Where is that knowledge? It's in that 5% of the population, the indigenous people. We have a linear spectrum that we live on in this society. We began and we're working towards the end. It's on our timeline of the years. We also have on this line a left and right. You can call it Democrat, Republican, but the spectrum only continues to widen. If you look at indigenous philosophies, we live in a circle. There is no left and right. There's no beginning, end. It's only a circle, and everything happens in circles. And until we can, as humanity, recognize that we're only human beings, little peons on this big planet, in this big universe, that we're a part of everything that is here, not in control of it, but a part of it, then we're going to continue to progress, but not in the way that is good.
What is working well in your current work, whether that be the restoration or the work in education that you're doing? What are you most excited about the work that you're doing right now in your position?
I think what I'm most excited about is that we're in a time where indigenous or traditional ecological knowledge can be implemented into the management of our home, our place, our land, our water, our animals. That in the past, colonization and colonialism was always the goal, was always to assimilate native people and to undermine everything we had. Today, we don't have to subscribe to that. And that's an individual decision. But at an academic level, we can show what colonization looks like. We can show what land use has done. We can also show what conservation success looks like, what successful wildlife management looks like. The decades that my dad fought for indigenous knowledge to be implemented in management, the headaches and the ulcers and the stress level that he had to go through has made it possible for me to do this work now in a way that it's accepted. He had to fight for this. I'm in a time where I'm actually able to implement it. That's exciting.
I want to say thank you and send thanks to you and your dad. It's really great to hear the story that you're telling, and I'm excited to stay in touch and follow along. So I really appreciate it, Jason. This has been great.
Thank you very much, Ben. I appreciate the opportunity to visit with you, and look forward to working with you more.
Okay.